It still went through Jonah's mind how he couldn't believe what God had asked him to do. Not just once, but a second time at that. Going to Nineveh? Oh, you've got to be crazy. Then he remembered the fish and, okay, if I don't go, I'm going to get it even worse. So he started the 3-day journey, and all that was going through his mind was the story of what the Ninevites enjoyed doing. How they treated each other very unfairly, but even those that came to their city, they treated even worse. Or even some stories about how the Assyrians throughout the country were almost like the Ninevites. Step by step, mile by mile, this kept going through Jonah's mind. Jonah couldn't even get this out of his mind, even though Jesus was whispering right beside him, just calm down, take it easy. I'm with you no matter what. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? Jonah kept going on the journey, and at night he would stop and he would rest, get up early and start again. Till the third day, where he came over the crest of a hill and he saw the city down below. What he really wanted to do is he wanted to turn back around and head for somewhere else. But every time that thought came back into his head, he was reminded that something worse could happen. So he started slowly down the hill, regretting every step that he had taken and praying that this was just a dream, and maybe if he pinched himself, he'd wake up. He pinched himself several times, and every time he did that, he kept screaming because he pinched himself harder and harder. It was funny because every time he did that, the people actually heard him in the city, and he didn't realize that. He kept walking down the hill, and closer he got, the closer he saw the entrance to the city. Closer to the entrance, he started realizing that he saw the guards there, and they didn't look very happy. All that went through Jonah's brain right at that time is, well, I wonder what side of the bed they woke up on this morning. Maybe they didn't have their morning cup of whatever. Well, I didn't either, but that doesn't matter. Jonah started going slower and slower and slower. Really not wanting to do what God had asked him to do, but knowing that if he hadn't, something else was going to happen. And Jonah didn't even want to imagine what God might do next. But at the same time, little did he know that the plans that God had for him were a lot more immense than even a whale could contain. Jonah was barely walking as he got to the gates of the city, and he stopped within a stone throw and stopped and prayed, asking God if this was really what he was supposed to do, and if it was okay just to turn around and walk away. All that Jonah heard was the continued instructions. I've given you what to say. Now go and do what I've asked you to do. Jonah was shaking as he walked through the gates of the city because he felt that the moment that he turned his back to the guards, all he would know is unconsciousness and then a jail cell, if that. The Ninevites were known to kill people that they didn't like. And Jonah was a prophet of God. Not only was he a prophet of God, they knew that, but he was from Israel, one of their hated enemies. They knew what Israel had done to them in the previous generations, and they had vowed revenge to the highest degree if they could only get a hold of, whether it was just an Israelite or even a prophet, whoever they could get a hold of, they would try to kill immediately. So Jonah was thinking about this as he's walking through the gates and into the city. He sees the people and how they're not treating each other correctly, and he gets even more scared because he knows that he's next. Jonah keeps walking into the city, and at that moment in time, he feels a hand on his shoulder. He turns around, and there's Jesus standing right behind him. He knew that Jesus was with him all the time, but just wasn't really wanting to talk to him. Other hand went onto the other shoulder, and he looked at him straight in the eyes, and Jesus said, "Don't fear. Know that even though you can't see me at times, know that I am with you always. I'll give you the words to say. Just go and do what I've asked you to do." Jonah shrugged his shoulders. All that he was thinking about is, "You have no idea what you're asking me to do. You told me that I was a prophet to Israel, not a prophet to Nineveh. Do you really know what you're saying?" Last thing Jonah heard was a chuckle, and he started walking down the street. Decided to take a side street and said, "Well, maybe if I start speaking out here, I won't get the wrath of the people." The next thing that Jonah knew is the fire in his heart became flamed again and burning brighter and brighter till all he could do was start shouting street by street, "Repent, repent! If you don't, God's going to destroy this city with fire." Now, they thought it was funny to start with. But when he kept saying this hour after hour, day after day, they knew something was serious. Now, they had heard of Israel's God, and they kind of just, well, whatever. He's just another God, and the mixture of all these gods that are here on this earth. But what Jonah didn't realize is that the people of Nineveh had been watching him every single step that he had taken since the whale spit him out on that beach. What Jonah didn't realize is that the very act of being in that whale was something that God was using at that time to actually get the people to change their hearts and to change their lives. Because what Jonah didn't realize is that the city of Nineveh actually worshipped whatever that creature was that swallowed Jonah. And so when they started hearing Jonah proclaim this day after day, moment by moment, they started getting scared because they saw all this stuff on Jonah that was a sign of the God that they worshipped. And they said, well, maybe what if Jonah is right and his God actually is the true God and we've actually been worshiping a lie? Some kind of pushed it off for a few moments, but later they came to that same conclusion. We need to do something. Maybe if we actually follow Jonah's God, we'll get out of this safely. And so they're watching from a distance. Some of them are sneaking around to hear Jonah, and they're hiding. And then they go to their king and they tell him what's going on. The king was kind of skeptical until the queen came into the royal chambers and said, I've been reading of Israel's God recently and how he does very strange things. Another thing that I've read is people of their culture, when they are telling their God that they're sorry, they are going without food and they're putting on sackcloth and they're putting ashes on their head. Now the king thought that was pretty silly, but then the queen said, not just that, they do it to their animals as well. Not the sackcloth, but the ashes. King looked at her, and he looked at her, and he took a deep breath, and he said, I think that you're right. You've always given me good counsel, so I better listen to you, or else something else might happen. Because it's not just you that's talking about this. Every single person in this city is talking about it. So the king himself went and he got what was needed, and he went out and he addressed all the people. And he sent out scrolls telling everybody in that city and around the city that what Jonah was saying was true. And that what they needed to do was they needed to put on sackcloth and ashes, and they needed to humble themselves and pray to Jonah's God that just maybe, God would forgive them and their city wouldn't be destroyed. What they didn't realize was that generations later, their grandkids would go back to what was, and the city would be eventually destroyed. But they wouldn't want to think about something like that at that time. All that was going through their minds was, maybe if we are true to what Jonah says and true to his God, then we'll be okay. So everybody in that city, from the youngest to the oldest to all the animals, did what the king commanded. Jonah looked around and, what are they doing? They're not supposed to listen to me. They're supposed to be killed. God's supposed to bring fire and judgment upon them. As this was going through Jonah's mind, he's like, well, what I'll do is I'll go out of the city and I'll wait. But what he didn't know is that God was right there watching the people, listening and hearing them, and he knew what he was going to do. He knew that because of Jonah, these people, all the people of the city, and even the animals were safe because Jonah did what he was asked to do. Are we doing what God is asking us to do? Good question for us to think about today. But Jonah, in his mind, he thought he had done all that God asked. But now what he decided to do, because he was so mad, he was waiting for vengeance, for fire from heaven. But all he got from God was an answer that was yet to come in a way that he could never imagine.